He rescued a lynx from an icy trap. What happened next shocked everyone. What makes a person risk everything for a wild predator that could tear him to pieces? This question had not yet formed in old Afanassy's mind as he squinted at the low winter sun and looked toward the far shore of the lake. There, on the dazzling white snow, a dark spot was behaving strangely. Too restless for a fox, too large for a hare. He shaded his eyes with his hand. The old gamekeeper's heart skipped a beat. A lynx, young judging by its careless movements. Hungry. Hunger makes even the most intelligent animals lose their heads. Afanasy turned away to his hole. It was none of his business. The forest would take care of itself. But he couldn't help looking. The lynx crept out onto the ice. It saw the same thing as Afanasy, a school of small fish playing near the washout, where the water had not frozen completely. Easy prey. Too easy. The old man tensed, sensing trouble. He knew this part of the lake. Spring springs gushed from the bottom, making the ice in this spot thin and treacherous, like a drunkard's promise. There was a dull, sickening crack that sounded like a gunshot in the taiga silence. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested to know where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's begin. The dark spot disappeared. All that remained was a black hole in the white canvas of the lake, from which a frightened cloud of snow dust and ice chips fluttered desperately. The lynx had fallen through. Afanasy froze. He had seen this dozens of times before. It was the end. In 10 minutes, even such a strong animal would turn into a lifeless carcass in the icy water. Its muscles would cramp up, and its heavy winter coat would drag it to the bottom. We had to leave. Any sane person would have gathered their gear and gone home before the predator attracted someone bigger with its splashing. But Afanasy was not sensible. He was a gamekeeper, a former one at that. He slowly got up, shook the snow off his boots, and looked at his hut 3 kilometers away through the forest. Then he looked back at the willow tree. Someone was still fighting for their life there. It was none of his concern. But his hands reached for the axe tucked into his belt and the old but-strong hemp rope in his backpack. He cursed under his breath, spat angrily, and without looking back, headed toward certain death. Either the lynx's or his own. He acted without haste, like a surgeon before a difficult operation. First, he found a young birch tree on the shore, cut it down with one stroke, and trimmed it into a long pole. Then, returning to the ice, he securely fastened one end of the rope to the trunk of a thick pine tree. He tied the other end around his waist as a safety measure. Now, if he fell through, he would have a chance to get out. A chance. In the taiga, that is the most precious word. He lay down on his stomach and began to crawl. The ice beneath him crackled menacingly, as if complaining about the extra weight. Every meter was a struggle. He was about 10 meters from the ice floe when he saw the lynx's eyes. They were huge, yellow, filled not with rage but with primal terror. The beast was almost motionless, only occasionally scraping its claws against the treacherous ice edge, which immediately broke off. Afanasy crawled closer. 5 meters. The lynx noticed him and hissed, baring its fangs. The hiss was weak and pitiful. It no longer had the strength to be aggressive. The old man stopped and spoke. Quietly, calmly, as he once spoke to sick horses. "Quiet, quiet, you fool. I won't hurt you. I want to help you." Quiet. The animal froze, not taking its eyes off him. He unwound the noose at the end of the rope and, keeping a safe distance, began to make attempts. The first attempt missed. The rope slapped into the water, The second attempt saw the noose slip off the wet fur. The lynx hissed again and struck the water with its paw, raising a fountain of icy spray. Afanasi patiently pulled out the rope, shook it off, and prepared for a third throw. He knew that he might not get another chance. The animal was visibly weakening. The old man took aim, swung the noose, and threw it forward gently. Got it. The noose fell precisely behind the lynx's front paws. He began to pull it in smoothly, without jerking. The lynx twitched, but it no longer had the strength to resist. Now came the hardest part. He had to pull. Afanasi braced his feet against the ice and pulled toward him. The animal's body was heavy as a wet log. The ice beneath the old man cracked louder, and thin cracks like spider webs spread out in all directions from his elbow. His heart sank into his boots. One more effort, and they would both end up in an icy grave. He closed his eyes and pulled with all his might, putting his whole life into the movement. There was a scraping sound, and a wet, icy body fell onto the ice. The lynx was on the surface. It didn't move, just convulsively shaking all over. Afanasi, breathing heavily, quickly crawled over, loosened the noose, and threw the rope away. Then, crawling, he retreated to a safe distance. He sat down on the snow, feeling his own hands tremble. The adrenaline receded, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. It was over. His mission was accomplished. Now the animal would come to its senses and disappear into the forest. It had always been this way. It was the law of nature. He sat there for 10 minutes, watching. The lynx finally stirred. Slowly, with visible effort, it rose to its paws, staggering like a drunkard. It shook itself off, scattering icy flakes around it. Afanasi waited. Now it would give him one last angry look and disappear among the trees. But the lynx did not run away. It took a few uncertain steps, but not toward the safety of the forest, but toward him. It stopped 10 meters away, tilted its head, and looked at him. There was no longer any fear or aggression in its gaze. There was something else. Something the old hunter had never seen in his long life. Afanasi got to his feet. The lynx did not move. He slowly walked over to his things, which he had left on the bank, trying not to make any sudden movements. He expected a blow to the back, a growl, an attack. Nothing. He reached his backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and turned around. The lynx stood in the same place and just stared. The old man waved his hand. "Go away. Scat! Go into the forest, you fool." His voice sounded hoarse. The animal just twitched its ear. Afanasi turned and walked along the path toward the house. After walking 100 meters, he couldn't resist and looked back. His heart skipped a beat again. The lynx was following him, keeping its distance. It wasn't getting closer, but it wasn't falling behind either. It simply followed him, as if tied by an invisible rope. It was wrong. It was unnatural. A predator should not follow a human. It should fear him, avoid him. Something in this world was broken. He tried to chase it away several more times. He shouted, stamped his feet, threw clumps of snow at it. The reaction was always the same. The lynx would stop, wait for him to calm down, and then continue following him. When the roofs of the village came into view, Afanasi became even more alarmed. But the lynx, as if sensing the boundary, stopped at the edge of the forest and watched him go. He reached his hut on the very edge of Sosnovka. He went inside, locked the heavy oak door with a bolt, and leaned his back against it. Silence. Only the old clock on the wall ticked away the seconds. He went to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain. There, in the gathering twilight, at the edge of the forest, sat a dark figure. She hadn't left. She was waiting. Afanasi felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold outside. He lit the stove and put the kettle on. He mechanically ate a piece of yesterday's bread. But the feeling of someone else's presence did not leave him. Every crack of the logs in the stove made him shudder. He went to the window again and again. The silhouette did not move. 2 lights burned in the darkness, staring straight at his house. The old man did not sleep all night. And in the morning, when the sky began to turn gray in the east, he made a decision. He took several frozen perch he had caught last week from the porch, went out onto the porch, and threw them onto the snow. Not too close, but not too far away. Then he returned to the house and began to watch. The lynx did not move for a long time. Then it slowly got up, approached the fish, quickly ate it, and returned to its previous place. At that moment, an old UAZ drove down the village street, raising clouds of snow. It stopped right at his gate. 3 men got out of the car. It was the local police officer, Anisimov, and 2 local hunters with rifles slung over their shoulders. One of them, Stepan Kryukov, saw the lynx and immediately raised his double-barreled shotgun. There was a dry click as the hammer was cocked. At that moment, the door of Afanasi's hut flew open. The old man ran out onto the porch and, without hesitation, stood directly between the guns and the lynx. "Don't shoot!" His cry pierced the morning silence. The hunters and the police officer froze in amazement, staring at the gray-haired old man who spread his arms, protecting the deadly predator with his body. Anisimov struggled to find his voice. "Petrovich, have you lost your mind? Get out of the way. It's a wild animal." But Afanasi didn't even flinch. He looked straight into Stepan's eyes, whose finger was on the trigger. "I said don't shoot. This is my land, and the animal is mine." The district police officer took a step forward, his face serious. "Petrovich, it's an order. Get out of the way." Stepan Kryukov hesitated. The old man's gaze was harder than the barrel of his gun. Afanasi didn't move an inch. He didn't shout or threaten. He just stood there. And in that calmness, there was a strength that the hunter felt in his gut. Local cop Anisimov put his hand on Stepan's shoulder. "Put it down," I said. "Petrovich, what's going on?" "Explain yourself. Baba Nura has been calling me all morning, saying there's a cannibal sitting outside your window." Afanasi slowly turned his gaze to the police officer. "She's not a cannibal. She's just stupid. I pulled her out of the ice hole yesterday. I barely managed to revive her. So she stuck around. She's hungry and frozen. She'll leave on her own when she comes to her senses." Stepan snorted incredulously. "She'll leave, sure. Straight into my chicken coop." "Petrovich, you're old. Have you lost your mind? She's a predator. She belongs in the forest, not on my porch. As long as she's on my land, I'm responsible for her," Afanasi snapped. "She hasn't hurt anyone. She's lying there quietly. You, Stepa, would do better to chase the poachers who are clearing the forest, instead of pointing your gun at a helpless animal." Anisimov sighed. It was a stalemate. Shooting an animal protected by a respected veteran would cause a scandal throughout the district, leaving everything as it was meant trouble. He made the only right decision. "Okay, Kryukov, second hunter, put your guns in the car, now." The hunters glanced at each other and reluctantly obeyed. The district police officer approached Afanasi, almost touching him. "Petrovich, I'm asking you nicely, and I'm warning you officially. I'm leaving now. But if by evening there's even one complaint, even one dog missing, I'll be back. And there will be no more talk. I'll call the district brigade. They won't stand on ceremony. Do you understand me? Afanasi nodded briefly. I understand. There will be no complaints. The UAZ turned around and, snorting with its exhaust, drove off toward the village, leaving behind a cloud of gray smoke. Afanasi stood on the porch for a long time, watching them go. Then he looked at the lynx. It sat in the same place, calmly watching the scene, as if it understood that its fate had just been decided. The old man went into the house and poured himself a mug of cold tea with trembling hands. He had won this battle. But he knew perfectly well that this was only the first battle. The war was just beginning, and the main enemy was not in the village. She sat in the city, in a warm apartment, and her name was Olga, his own daughter. The news spread through Sosnovka faster than a forest fire. Old Zakharov had tamed a lynx. He had completely lost his mind. Some people tapped their fingers on their temples. Others were afraid. Mothers forbade their children from playing at the edge of the village. The men in the only store discussed what to do if the beast started killing livestock. Afanasi became an outcast overnight. But he didn't care. He had developed his own silent routine. In the morning, he would bring the lynx fish or a piece of meat from his meager supplies. The lynx, which he had secretly named Red, ate the offering and went back into the forest. But in the evening, she always returned and settled down at her observation post by the woodshed. They did not approach each other. There was always a distance between them, an invisible line separating the world of humans and the world of animals. But Afanasi no longer felt alone. The presence of this wild, dangerous creature strangely calmed him. He talked to her when he was in the yard, telling her about his late wife, about the forest, about trifles. The lynx just listened, bowing her head slightly. On the third day, the phone rang. Afanasi knew who it was. He picked up the heavy bakelite receiver. Yes, he said curtly. Dad, Aunt Masha called. Is it true? What are you doing? Are you taking care of yourself? Olga's daughter's voice rang out in panic and indignation on the other end of the line. She lived in the district center, 100 kilometers away, and considered her father an unreasonable child who needed to be constantly supervised. Quiet, Olga. Everything is fine. Don't shout. How is everything fine? There's a wild animal walking around outside your window. What if it attacks you or the neighbors? Dad, call the hunters immediately. Do you hear me? Afanasi sighed heavily. I'm not calling anyone. She's harmless. And anyway, it's none of your business. Oh, it's none of my business? Tears welled up in his daughter's voice. I'll come over tomorrow, and we'll talk about this properly. There was a series of short beeps on the line. Afanasi slowly hung up the receiver. He knew that things were about to get much worse. Olga didn't understand the forest. She was afraid of it. And everything she was afraid of, she tried to destroy or lock up in a cage. She arrived the next morning in her old Matiz, which barely made it through the snow-covered country road. Olga jumped out of the car, wrapped in her city-down jacket, and looked in horror at her father's house, which seemed to her like a besieged fortress. She saw tracks, huge cat tracks in the snow leading from the forest straight to the porch. Dad, she cried, running to the door. Afanasi came out to meet her, calm and sullen. I told you not to come. Why did you come? For you. Get ready, you're coming with me to the city. Enough. I can't go on like this, waiting every day for a call saying you've been found frozen or torn apart. She stopped short because at that moment, Redhead slowly and gracefully emerged from behind the woodshed. The lynx stopped when it saw the unfamiliar car and the new figure. and stared curiously at Olga with its unblinking yellow eyes. Olga screamed and recoiled, pressing herself against her father. My God, she's here. She's real. Her face was as white as snow. She looked from the beast to her completely calm father. The fear in her eyes gave way to anger. She pushed her father away and took a step forward, holding her bag in front of her like a shield. Dad, I'm giving you 1 hour. 1 hour to call your local police officer and demand that they take her away. Shoot her, put her to sleep, I don't care. If you don't do it in an hour, I'll call myself. Not the local cop, the emergency services, the animal control service, anywhere. I'll tell them that a rabid hare is terrorizing the village and attacked a pensioner. They'll come quickly, and they won't talk to her. Afanasi looked at his daughter, then at the redhead. The beast didn't move, as if waiting for his decision. Olga's eyes were cold and unyielding. She wasn't joking. She was ready to do anything to save him. The old man realized that his quiet world had finally collapsed. He was trapped, in a trap worse than the icy swamp. On one side was a wild beast that had trusted him. On the other, his own daughter, who was threatening him and this beast in the name of her love and care. He looked at Olga and quietly but firmly uttered one word. No. Olga gasped with indignation. What? What did you say? I said no. You won't call anyone, and you won't tell me what to do. At that moment, Redhead took a step forward, not toward Olga, toward Afanasi. She came closer than ever before and sat down at his feet, raising her head and looking straight at the screaming woman. Olga froze, her mouth open in a silent scream of horror. The beast had chosen his side, and it wasn't hers. Olga stared at the scene, unable to believe her eyes. A wild, dangerous predator sat at her father's feet like a tame dog, looking at her with cold, appraising calm. Her entire world, built on logic and safety rules, was crumbling. In her mind, the lynx was a threat, an anomaly that had to be eliminated immediately. But here in the snowy wilderness, this beast was part of the landscape, part of her father. She glanced at Afanasi. His face was calm, but deep in his blue eyes burned the same stubborn spark she had known since childhood. A spark that meant there was no point in arguing. You chose, she whispered, her voice a mixture of hurt, anger, and fear. You chose this monster over your own daughter. She didn't wait for an answer. Turning abruptly, she rushed to her car, got behind the wheel, and awkwardly turning around in the narrow space, sped away, her wheels kicking up swirls of snow. Afanasi watched her until the little car disappeared around the bend. A heavy weight settled on his heart. He didn't want this fight, but he couldn't back down. That would be a betrayal, not only to Rija, but to himself. He lowered his hand and touched the stiff fur on the lynx's neck. The animal didn't flinch. It just growled quietly, almost inaudibly. Olga wasn't bluffing. Back in town, she sprang into action. She didn't call the emergency services. She was afraid they would think she was crazy. But she called everyone she knew in the district administration. She complained, demanded, begged. She described the situation in the darkest terms. An old, frail father had been taken hostage by a wild animal. The whole village was in panic, and the children were afraid to leave their homes. Her words, multiplied by her status as a distraught city girl, had an effect. A day later, the local police officer Anisimov arrived in Sosnovka again. This time he was not alone. With him was a game warden, a grim man in camouflage, and 2 more burly men. The UAZ stopped again at Afanasi's gate. The old man met them on the porch. The redhead was nowhere to be seen. Petrovich, the conversation is over. Anisimov began wearily, avoiding the old man's gaze. I've received an official report from the district. I've been ordered to resolve the problem. The inspector is with me. He has a license to shoot. The grim inspector stepped forward. Where is the animal, Zakharov? His voice was harsh and businesslike. In the forest, Afanasy replied just as curtly. She doesn't live here. She comes and goes. We've been told that she won't leave you alone, and that she's acting aggressively, insisted the inspector. You've been lied to, the old man snapped. Prove it, Anisimov intervened. Petrovich, I don't want this. Help me. If she's just a wild animal that ran off into the woods, there's no problem. But if she comes back while we're here, the inspector has orders. He'll have to shoot her, right here, in your yard. Afanasy understood. He had been given one last chance. If Redhead didn't show up, they would have no formal reason to shoot her. All he had to do was stall for time. He invited them into his house. He poured tea. He began telling endless stories from his life as a gamekeeper. He talked about bears, wolves, and poachers. The inspector fidgeted in his chair, clearly nervous. Anisimov listened silently, nodding occasionally. They sat like that for over an hour. It was getting dark outside. Well, Petrovich, thanks for the tea, but we have to go, said the inspector, getting up. I guess your cat really is gone. But keep in mind, Zakharov, one more call and I'll come alone, and I won't be talking. They were already stepping out into the porch when a muffled but furious growl came from the street. Everyone froze. The growl repeated, accompanied by the crack of breaking branches and someone's frightened cry. Anisimov was the first to rush out into the street. The others followed him. The scene that met their eyes made them freeze in their tracks. Two shadows were fussing around Afanasy's shed, where he kept his tools and some of his belongings. They were trying to break the old barn lock off the door. Between them and the house, blocking their retreat, stood Rizhaya. She did not attack. She stood in a low, threatening stance, the hair on her neck bristling, and a low, guttural growl escaped from her mouth. The two men, local outcasts, the Volkov brothers, who had heard that the old gamekeeper had an expensive rifle, froze in terror. They couldn't run or defend themselves. One of them, the younger one, whimpered in fear. The gamekeeper instinctively raised his gun, but Anisimov imperiously lowered the barrel. Stand still. She won't touch them. She's holding them back. Everyone watched, spellbound. The lynx slowly took a step forward, and the brothers backed away, pressing themselves against the wall of the shed. She was completely in control of the situation. Wolf hunters, stay where you are. Police! Anisimov shouted, coming to his senses. The brothers, seeing the local police officer, seemed even glad. For them, a man in uniform was less of an evil than an enraged predator. While Anisimov and his assistants were dealing with the hapless thieves, the inspector approached Afanasy. He stared for a long time at the lynx, which, seeing that the danger had passed, moved aside and sat down in the snow, watching what was happening. I've never seen anything like it, he said quietly, addressing himself rather than the old man. A wild animal, protecting a human being. Not attacking, but protecting. Like a dog. He looked at Afanasy, and something resembling respect appeared in his stern gaze. All right, Petrovich. Consider the call canceled. I'll write in my report that the animal is in the forest and poses no threat. But you, be careful with her. He turned and walked to his car. Anisimov shoved the Volkovs into the UAZ and approached the old man. Well, Petrovich, you're the man. You saved me from a pile of paperwork, and she saved you from a lot of trouble." He nodded toward the lynx. "I think I was wrong about her, but I understand your daughter. She's worried." He got into the car, and the UAZ disappeared into the darkness, taking the thieves with it. Afanasi was left alone in his yard. He approached Rija. For the first time, he felt no danger, no barrier. He knelt down on one knee and held out his hand. The lynx hesitated for a second, then stepped forward and nudged his outstretched palm with her cold, wet nose. At that moment, the old man realized that his life would never be the same again. The rumor about how Zakharova's lynx had caught the thieves instantly changed the attitude toward her in the village. Fear gave way to surprise and even some respect. Stepan Kryukov, the very hunter who had wanted to shoot her, coughed awkwardly when he met Afanasi and handed him a bag of frozen liver. "This is for your bodyguard, Petrovich. Give it to her." Afanasi became a local celebrity. But there was one problem. Olga. She didn't call. He tried to dial her number himself, but his daughter didn't answer. A week later, when the thaw had already begun and water was dripping from the roofs, her Matisse reappeared at his gate. Olga got out of the car. She looked tired and determined. She was carrying a large travel bag. "Dad," she said without preamble, "I've made up my mind. Since you don't want to go to the city will come to you. I took a vacation at my own expense. I'm going to live with you." Afanasi was taken aback. "Why? I'm fine." "No, you're not," Olga said firmly. "I can't sleep at night knowing you're here alone. With that." She waved her hand vaguely toward the forest. "I have to be here, to keep an eye on things. And if that beast does anything wrong, I'll be there to call for help." She wasn't going to give up. She was going to wear him down. Olga entered the house and began unpacking her things, her whole demeanor indicating that she was here to stay. Afanasi realized that the real battle for his world and for Redhead was just beginning. And now the enemy would be living under the same roof as him. Strange days began, filled with a dull, unspoken tension. Olga took charge of the household with the energy of a commander storming an enemy redoubt. She washed, cleaned, and cooked meals for a week in advance, creating a cocoon of urban care and comfort around her father. But all her actions were driven by one goal: to prove that her world, a world of order and security, was better and more correct than his, a world of wild animals outside the windows. She demonstratively shuddered every time she saw Rizhaya. She loudly locked all the locks at night, even though doors had never been locked in Sosnovka. She behaved as if the house were under siege. Afanasi remained silent. He understood her tactics. She was trying to drive Red out of his life by making her presence unbearable for both of them. Red, in turn, seemed to sense a new threat. She became more cautious. She hardly ever showed herself during the day, appearing only at dusk to pick up the food left for her. She looked at Olga with the same cold distrust with which Olga looked at her. A silent war was raging between the woman and the beast for the old man's attention and territory. The climax came a few days later. Olga, cleaning the porch, stumbled upon her father's old trap. It was large, bear-sized, and covered in rust. She carried it out onto the porch, her face pale with determination. "Dad, what's this?" she asked when Afanasi came out of the house. "A trap, an old one," he grumbled, not understanding what she was getting at. "I know it's a trap." Her voice rang out. "I want you to set it by the barn, where those thieves go and where she goes." Afanasi froze. He looked at his daughter as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Are you out of your mind? Are you asking me to maim the animal that saved me? He didn't save you. Olga exploded. Those two just got in his way. What if there had been a child in their place? What if it had attacked him? Did you think about that? That trap is our guarantee of safety. Your safety. My safety is none of your business. Afanasy raised his voice for the first time. I've lived in this forest for 70 years, and I know better than you what safety is. That piece of rusty iron isn't safety. It's cowardice. Cowardice. Olga laughed bitterly. Defending your life is cowardice. But feeding a predator near the house where your only daughter lives is normal? Dad, you have to choose. It's either me or her. She gave him an ultimatum, harsh and final. At that moment, Redhead came around the corner of the house. She was obviously heading for her usual spot, but when she saw the tense scene, she stopped. She looked at Olga screaming, at the trap at her feet, at Afanasy standing frozen. And in her yellow eyes, the old man saw something like sadness for the first time. She understood everything. She was superfluous in this world. Afanasy looked at his daughter, at her face contorted with anger and fear. Then he looked at the beast, which was silently awaiting its sentence. And he made his choice. He slowly approached Olga, silently took the heavy trap from her hands, swung it, and threw it with all his might far into the ravine behind the house. The trap disappeared with a dull thud into the deep snow. That's it, he said quietly, but loud enough for his daughter and the lynx to hear. There will be no more talk of this. If you can't accept my life as it is, then you have no place here. Leave. Olga looked at him, her lips trembling. She had lost. Definitely. Without another word, she turned, went into the house, came out 10 minutes later with her bag packed, got into the car, and drove away. Afanasy and Redhead remained alone, watching her go. Victory tasted like bitter ashes. After Olga left, a ringing silence reigned in the house. Afanasy felt devastated. He had won, defended his world, but at what cost? He had quarreled with the only person who was dear to him. Rizhaya, as if sensing his state, moved closer. Now she would come right up to the porch and let him pet her. Their strange friendship grew stronger every day. But trouble came from where they least expected it. A thaw began. A real, rapid thaw. The snow melted before their eyes, turning into dirty slush. The river, frozen solid all winter, broke open. The water, muddy and high, broke the ice with a deafening crash, carrying huge chunks downstream. The village was cut off from the mainland. The old wooden bridge connecting Sosnovka to the district road could not withstand the pressure and collapsed. The residents were trapped. Supplies in the only store were quickly running out. But the worst was yet to come. The wife of Stepan Kryukov, the hunter, went into premature labor. It was a difficult delivery. She urgently needed a doctor, but no car, let alone an ambulance, could reach the village. In the evening, a terrified Stepan ran to Afanasy's house. Petrovich, help, trouble. Masha is giving birth, and our paramedic is throwing up her hands, saying there's no way without a hospital. She's bleeding. She'll die. Afanasy understood the seriousness of the situation. The phones weren't working, and there was no communication with the district. The only way was across the river. But how? We need a helicopter, Afanasy said hoarsely. But who will call it? There's no time for a helicopter. Stepan almost cried. Petrovich, you know the forest. There must be some way. Maybe further up streams where the river is wider. Afanasy thought for a moment. There was one way. An old gamekeeper's trail that led to an abandoned crossing 10 kilometers upstream. There, between two rocks, the river was narrow and fast, Once upon a time, a steel cable had been stretched across it. If it was still there, they could cross. But that was madness. To walk at night through the soggy forest, carrying a sick woman. It's impossible, Stepan. We won't make it. The old man shook his head. And at that moment, he heard a quiet rumbling behind him. He turned around. Rizhaya was sitting on the porch, looking at him as if she understood everything. And a desperate, crazy plan was born in Afanassy's head. He looked at Stepan. Gather the men. We need strong sleds and ropes. Lots of ropes and blankets. Hurry! Stepan, not understanding what the old man was up to but clinging to his last hope, rushed to carry out the order. Half an hour later, several of the strongest men in the village gathered at Afanassy's house. They laid Stepan's moaning wife in the sleigh, wrapping her in all the warm clothes they could find. Afanassy came out of the house with his rifle and a cartridge belt. I'll go first and show you the way. You follow me. Don't fall behind. They set off. The red-haired woman walked beside Afanassy, stepping lightly on the slushy snow. She was not afraid of people or the darkness. She was in her element. The journey was hellish. They sank into the water and clung to branches. Several times the sleigh almost overturned, but Afanassy stubbornly led them forward, navigating by landmarks known only to him. And Rizhaya, she did something incredible. She ran a little ahead, and when the trail became completely impassable or dangerous, she stopped and growled quietly, forcing the group to look for a way around. She seemed to sense the thin ice under the snow and the deep pits hidden by meltwater. She was their guide, their guardian angel in animal form. After 3 hours of exhausting travel, they reached the crossing. The rope was still there, rusty but strong. Getting the woman across to the other side was incredibly difficult and dangerous. But they managed it. An ambulance was already waiting on the other side, which the forester's wife, who lived on that side, had somehow managed to call. When the sled with the woman was loaded into the car and it disappeared into the night with the siren wailing, Stepan approached Afanassy. He said nothing. He just bowed low to the old man in silence. Then he turned and bowed just as silently to the lynx, which was sitting a little way off, watching them with its intelligent yellow eyes. The return trip to the village was spent in complete silence. The men, exhausted and soaked, breathed heavily, but now there was no despair in their steps. There was a heavy, masculine fatigue and silent respect for each other, and for the old man who led them, and for the animal walking beside him. When they entered Sosnovka, it was already dawn. They were met by alarmed women. The news that Stepan's wife had been taken to the hospital spread instantly, and Afanassy was no longer regarded as a crazy old man, but as a savior. He paid no attention to this. Reaching his hut, he nodded silently to the men and went inside. The red-haired woman did not linger, disappearing into the morning mist and into the forest. Afanassy fell onto the bed in his wet clothes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. He was awakened by insistent knocking on the door. It was already evening. Stepan was standing in the doorway. His face, gray with horror just yesterday, was now glowing. Petrovich, my son was born. The hospital said another half hour and it would have been over. They wouldn't have been able to save Masha or him. The doctors say it's a miracle. He handed Afanassy a bundle. Inside was a loaf of freshly baked bread, still warm, and a jug of milk. This is for you, from us. And give some to her too. Stepan nodded toward the forest. He didn't know how to thank the beast, but he wanted to. The next few days were like a dream. The world around Afanassy had changed. People began to greet him on the street, visit him, and bring him treats. Someone repaired his crooked fence. Someone brought him firewood. The village that had considered him an outcast just a week ago now accepted him back, surrounding him with belated care. He accepted this calmly, without joy, but also without alienation. The main wound still hurt. Olga. She never called. He looked at his phone, but it remained silent. He understood that he had saved a stranger's family, but destroyed his own. The redhead had changed too. She became more confident, calmer. Sometimes she would go into the forest for the whole day to hunt, but she always returned in the evening. She was part of his life, a silent shadow, a reminder that even in the middle of nowhere, you don't have to be alone. One day, sitting on the porch, he saw a large all-terrain truck approaching the village on the dry road, the kind used by loggers. The truck stopped at his gate. Olga jumped out of the cab and onto the ground. She was not alone. With her was the driver, who began unloading some bags and boxes from the back of the truck. Olga approached her father. She looked different. Gone was the urban severity and panic. There was a quiet weariness. "Hello, Dad," she said. "Hello," he replied. They were silent for a moment. "Anisimov called me, the local police officer," Olga finally said, not looking him in the eye. "He told me about the Volkovs and about Stepan's wife, about how you carried her through the forest." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Forgive me, Dad. I'm such a fool. I tried to lock you in my world while you were saving yours and other people's." Meanwhile, the driver had carried the last bag to the porch. It was labeled, "Premium cat food with salmon." Olga smiled crookedly. "I didn't know what to bring. They said this was the best in town." She didn't know how to make peace with the beast. So she did what she knew how to do. She tried to solve the problem in a city way. It was ridiculous and touching at the same time. Afanasy looked at the bag, then at his daughter, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. "She won't eat that. She's a hunter." He walked over to Olga and hugged her for the first time in many years, tightly like a bear. "Thank you for coming, daughter." At that moment, as if sensing that something important was happening, Redhead emerged from the forest. She stopped at her usual distance when she saw Olga in the unfamiliar car. She tensed. Olga froze, but there was no longer any terror on her face. There was fear mixed with respect and curiosity. She looked at the beast that had saved her father, saved a woman with a child, a beast that turned out to be more human than many people. Afanasy let go of his daughter. He took a piece of meat from the bundle Stepan had brought, which he had kept for Redhead, and handed it to Olga. "Give it to her. Don't be afraid. Just put it on the ground and step back." Olga hesitated for just a second. Then she took the meat, slowly walked to the edge of the yard, put it on the grass, and stepped back, standing next to her father. Rizha waited until they had moved away, then gracefully approached, took the meat, and, without taking it into the forest, lay down on the grass and began to eat. Right in front of them. It was a sign of the highest trust, a sign of acceptance, a sign of peace. Spring passed, and the warm, short Siberian summer arrived. Life in Sosnovka settled into a new routine. Afanasy was no longer a recluse. Neighbors often stopped by to chat or ask for advice. Stepan Kryukov named his son Afanasy in honor of his savior. Olga came every weekend, and she and her father would take long walks in the forest, where he taught her to understand the language of trees and tracks. She was no longer afraid. She learned to respect his world. The redhead stayed. She never became tame. She was a wild and free beast, mistress of the taiga. But her home was now here, next to the old gamekeeper's hut. She still came every evening, and they sat on the porch, each lost in their own thoughts, watching the sun go down. They didn't need words. Their story became a legend. A story about how an old man went to rescue a lynx from an icy trap, and about what happened next. About how, by saving one animal, he unwittingly saved an entire village. He saved his daughter, and in the end, he saved himself from a loneliness that was colder than any ice. Who was right in this confrontation? Olga, who wanted to take her father to a safe city out of love? Or Afanasi, who defended his right to live as he was accustomed to, alongside a dangerous but loyal animal, until the very end?